Jesus has many names in the Bible, many different titles explain who he is. But there's something special about the name Immanuel. The prophecy about Jesus says that the virgin will conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Immanuel, which means God with us. And of course, all of Jesus' ministry is special, but the idea of God with us harkens back to what we were made for. We were made to be with God, and here God has come down to be with us. God has a history of coming down to be with us. We see it in the Tower of Babel, when God comes down to look at what man has made, and it's clear from the text that it's kind of a joke that God would have to come down in order to see this tower that's supposed to reach his house. But even more importantly, when we look at Exodus, we see God saying, I have heard the cries of my people, and I have come down to rescue them. And the whole book of Exodus revolves around God coming down and being with his people to save them and to lead them in the desert. But as we consider Jesus as God with us, God come down to us, he comes down at two different times. We call them the two Advents. And the first of these is at Christmas. God conceived in a virgin by the Spirit. It's an incredible mystery. And sometimes we think that God's humiliation began at the cross, where he is stripped and beaten and tortured. But God's humiliation actually began at the manger, as he humbled himself to take on the form of a servant, even the humble, frail flesh of a little baby. And what God accomplished is our salvation. Now, it can be difficult to talk about Christmas because we talk about it so much every year. It's very familiar and nostalgic, and it's a busy time of year. And so Christmas as a holiday sometimes dulls us to the power of the incarnation. You see, the East has a really great way of thinking about salvation in the incarnation. The Eastern Church says that when Christ took on flesh, that was the beginning of saving our human flesh by uniting the divine nature with the human nature. The healing process began, and not in some metaphorical way, but truly beginning to heal creation. That first bit, Jesus is called the first fruits of our salvation. And so the challenge is to recapture that wonder at the incarnation every year when we celebrate Christmas. Now, there's a particular song that I would like to point your attention to that does a good job of this for me. It's called Anthem for Christmas by Michael W. Smith. And this album dates back to 1989 and sounds like it if you try to listen to it. But it does a great job of focusing on Jesus as God's revelation. And it begins, in the space of the beginning was the living word of light. When this word was clearly spoken, all that came to be was right. All creation had a language, words to say what must be said. All day long the heavens whispered, signing words in scarlet red. But some had failed to understand it, so God spoke his final word. On a silent night in Judah's hills, a baby's cry was heard. Glory, sang the angel chorus. Glory, echoed back the night. Love has come to walk among us. Christ the Lord is born this night. The idea that the angels would cry out and that nature, even in darkness, would respond, a kind of call and response of worship, is a beautiful picture. But especially that idea that love has come to walk among us. What an incredible truth. God with us means love has come to walk among us. In his love he came, and his love he demonstrated in his coming. And one of the things that we sometimes forget is that Jesus lived a normal life for much of that time and demonstrated how we ought to live. As love came to walk among us, he did normal things. He held down a job. He worked within the context of his family. He had neighbors. And in each of these areas, he is our example of the way that we ought to live. Now, that example was taken from us, and we can see it in Scripture, but it will come back again. And this brings us to the second advent, which is when Christ returns. One day he will be with us again. One day we will together with heaven and earth proclaim his glory to him. We will see the one that we have believed in. We will have fellowship with him, as the disciples did. And so once again, we end our time in worship. Worship is shaped by our longing and our desire. And our longing is for Christ's return. Our desire is for his reign to be complete in our world, for creation to be made whole again, and that we can be with the one that we were made to be with. And Christ in his first coming gives us hope for that second coming.